Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much. So a few years ago, the Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, was in our community. He was going around touring Texas, and maybe some of you might have been in that room. So he was here in Midland, and he was sharing information. He was giving updates on the Texas Education Agency, but he was also sharing information about our regional data. And during his presentation to those who were there, and I happened to be there, but so were representatives from the education community in Midland, from the education community in Odessa, as well as business leaders in both communities. And one of the things that he said that has stuck with me to this day is he gave an analogy of people in a boat. And what he said was that if there are more than two people in a boat, and there's a hole in the boat, then it's really not going to matter what side of the boat the hole is in, because the boat, if the hole is not fixed, the boat will sink, and so will the people in the boat. And as we think about this morning, the concept or idea of collaboration that Grant shared with us, I couldn't think of a more appropriate analogy that really expresses the dire or critical, and I'm going to say dire and critical, need for collaboration. In 1973, there were two social scientists who defined a certain class of complex social challenges that they referred to as wicked problems. Now, from a community standpoint, I think we're all aware of this. Grant referenced them, and a little bit later we're going to be hearing from Tracy and the work that the PSB is doing to address some of these wicked problems. What are wicked problems? Wicked problems are messy, ill-defined, more complex than we fully grasp, and open to multiple interpretations based on one's point of view. They're messy. Every community has large social challenges. The problem is that they're not easily solved, or definitely they can't be solved in isolation. So what are some examples of some wicked problems? Poverty, education, health and wellness. And what we're going to be hearing later, and what we all know if you live in this community, the big challenges we face: infrastructure, workforce, to name a few. Now, as a former public school educator of over 20 years, my career was within a school system. And what I came to realize over the course of my career is that we would never, ever, ever be able to really address the educational challenges we face in isolation. But in my professional career, a lot of times, school systems or campuses operate in isolation. And it dawned on me years ago the shortcoming that provides. And so as a former principal, as a former superintendent, in my mind it always dawned on me, well, wait a minute. If I have a collection of kids coming to a campus, these kids are coming from somewhere. Which means that their parents, they're worshiping somewhere, they're socializing somewhere, they're entertaining somewhere. So why are we approaching this task of educating in isolation and not together? In 2011, there was an article that came out in the Stanford Social Innovation Review entitled Collective Impact. And I think this really hits the nail on the head as to what kind of dynamic are we talking about when it comes to these large social challenges that every community has, these macro challenges, and maybe the approach of how communities might address those challenges or not address those challenges. Now, according to a collective impact perspective, this is what was stated in the article. Large-scale social change requires broad cross-sector coordination. Sounds like an approach to a wicked problem. But how do communities typically address these big challenges that are bigger than any one entity? Unfortunately, yet the social sector remains focused on the isolated intervention of individual organizations. Now, I think you could see why that's a problem. If I have a big social challenge and I'm trying to address it in isolation, there's going to be a disconnect. Here's a visual that I think really captures why this is important. At the top, you see arrows pointing in all different directions. And I think this is pretty representative of how most communities are. We have churches, we have schools, we have businesses, we have nonprofits, we have you name it. We have multiple oil and gas companies. But historically, what happens is, even when you have dedicated individuals, even when you have people who care about a situation and they want to make a difference, if I'm doing it over here by myself and I'm facing in this direction, and there's an organization that maybe is trying to attack the same challenge, but they're not connected to me, and they're over here doing it in this direction, chances are there's going to be a disconnect, or even, let's just say, from a very pragmatic or a realistic standpoint of view, there's going to be a limitation on what can be accomplished naturally, because the problem is so big, it's so complex, it's so messy. But from a collective impact perspective, the idea then is to say, what if, from a community's perspective, we identify all of those arrows, bring them together, and at least point them in the same direction, so that we can now leverage what everybody is bringing to the table for a greater impact, a collective impact. So based on that, I happen to currently serve as the executive director for a collective impact organization, the Education Partnership of the Permian Basin. The sole purpose of the Education Partnership of the Permian Basin is to improve educational outcomes in our region, cradle to career. Education, big, messy, wicked problem, complex, cradle to career. Now, that's our purpose. What is our vision? The vision of the Education Partnership of the Permian Basin is to build a community where students love to learn, teachers love to teach, and people love to live, with a mission of creating the highest performing educational region in the state of Texas. A few years ago, when Mike Morath was here, the data didn't show that we were the highest performing educational region in the state of Texas. Now, established in 2018, there are two focus points at this point in time with the Education Partnership of the Permian Basin on this cradle to career continuum. We've established an early childhood action network whose purpose is to help improve or increase kindergarten readiness rates in our community. And we've also established a Grow Our Own action network whose purpose is to help increase educational pipelines and pathways that lead to workforce development. Why start with ECAN or birth to 5? Here's why. Recent kindergarten readiness data in our community, this was pre-COVID, indicates that 6 out of 10 students who start their educational careers, start behind. Now let's think about that. What that means is the majority of our kids who start school day one are already starting behind the starting line. Already. Which means that the school systems, the teachers then, and the administrators and everybody whose job is to educate kids, obviously, they're playing catch up from day one. This matters. This matters. So, even though the ECAN's role is to start or to try to improve kindergarten readiness rates, we actually start at birth. Now, Grant had mentioned, those naysayers or those cynics, and I don't believe we have any in this audience today, but it's interesting because I hear them as a former educator. We talked about negativity. Well, isn't that the job of the teachers? Isn't that the job of the administrators? Isn't that the job of the superintendent and the school system and the school board? Their job is to educate kids. Their job is to close the achievement gap. Their job is to make sure that kids are graduated, prepared for life after graduation. Yeah, that's that job. It is their job. Here's what I'm going to say as a former principal, as a former teacher, as a former campus administrator, superintendent. Every single team I've ever been a part of, every campus I've been on, every district I've been a part of, we woke up every day doing that. And it sounds simple if life was linear. It sounds simple for those of you who are left brain or very linear logical. Yes, if A plus B equals C, presto. But what did we say? Education isn't necessarily this linear proposition. It's messy, it's complex. And here's what's crazy, and this is what's unfortunate. And maybe this is just our human nature. Think about a time when you've been confounded or dumbfounded with a situation that you can't quite grasp, that you can't quite wrap your mind around. What's the easiest thing to do? Cast blame. What's the easiest thing to do? Point the finger and say, well, here's why. And so what does that look like in a community or in a context of education? Here's what this looks like. Typically, the blame game, the scapegoating that takes place, always happens with the preceding stage of education or development. So what does that look like? Colleges lament the fact that, man, these incoming freshmen, the vast majority of them haven't taken remedial classes. They can't even start taking their regular college classes, or I'm in English 101. They don't even know how to write. If only the high schools would do a better job. And you know what the high schools are saying? Hey, man, I'm doing the best I can with what I got. It's really those middle schools. If the middle schools would really catch them up, then when they get to me and being a freshman, they'd pass algebra and it'd all be good. And the middle schools are saying, whoa, wait a minute. I'm getting 6th graders or 7th graders who are struggling reading and writing. It's those dang elementary schools. And the upper elementary grades are saying, hey man, come on 3rd grade, we need you to make sure our kids are reading on 3rd grade. And 3rd grade saying, well heck, they didn't get it in kindergarten. And what are our kindergarten and our pre-K saying? Doing the best I can, so you already know how this goes. Well, if only those parents. If only those parents. So here's what's interesting. Even though the ECAN, our goal is to focus on kindergarten readiness rates, we actually begin at birth. How do we do that? Through the Power Bag Initiative, which stands for Power of Words in Early Reading, we have partnered with our local hospitals. Hospitals, plural. We have partnered with Midland Memorial, Midland Health. We have partnered with ORMC. We have partnered with MCH. And we're excited to announce that we've also partnered with Scenic Mountain in Big Spring, and we've also partnered with Reeves County in Pecos. And in fact, tomorrow we're going to be doing a packing party for all these bags. So what is the purpose of the Power Bag? So the purpose of the Power Bag is to encourage families, parents, to read, sing, play, interact with children as frequently as possible beginning at birth. So what that means is every mom who gives birth upon discharge from the hospital receives a Power Bag with information on brain development, on literacy development, on milestone moment development. And if you go to powerbag.org, there's additional resources, local resources, national resources that really provide more information on these developmental stages. Why is this important? Here's why this is important. Research shows that 85% of a baby's brain, a child's brain, is fully developed by the age of 3. And that 90% of a child's brain is fully developed by the age of 5. But yet we're waiting for our pre-K and kinders to just do the job for the whole community. Well, what's happening from birth to 5? So from a collective impact perspective, this Power Bag is great. It's wonderful, but it's only the first step. Why is it only the first step? Because if we're really going to, as a community, attack and address the kindergarten readiness rates in our community, and kids don't start until the age of 4 or 5, and we're starting at birth, then from a collective impact perspective, a cross-coordinated, cross-sector perspective, the idea then is to say, what are all the arrows, what are the touch points in the lives of a birth to 5-year-old? Well, these are the touch points: hospitals, pediatricians, clinics, nonprofits, child care providers, social service agencies, and the school district. So now let's bring them all together. Let's bring them to the table and connect the dots. It's a messy, large challenge. It's a wicked problem. But if we're trying to approach kindergarten readiness in isolation, well, I'm going to do mine over here, and I'm going to do mine over here, and I'm going to do mine over here, and then what's the old adage? Hope or wishing isn't a plan. Well, I hope it works. I wish that it'll work. When we think about collective impact, I personally can't imagine what our community would be like today if exactly what Grant said had not occurred to create the Wagner Noel through collaboration. Think about COVID. I can't think what our community would be like today if another major collaborative effort didn't occur in our community between both communities to really support the West Texas Food Bank. And just recently, about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to attend a press conference and a ribbon cutting, and many of you might have been there, some of you were there, for the new fire academy at Midland College. Now, this is a perfect example of what can happen when a community attacks or addresses one of these big, messy challenges and brings everybody cross-sector coordination to the table. We know that we need firefighters. We know that we need first responders. And so as a result, you had the City of Midland, Midland College, Midland ISD, Greenwood ISD, Stanton ISD, and philanthropy all come together to create the Midland Fire Academy, which, on this cradle-to-career continuum, is exactly what we're trying to do. Take all of these arrows, bring them together, align them, point them in the same direction, because nobody can do it alone. Our challenges are too big. Our challenges are too big. So, in closing, as you leave here today, I want y'all to take with y'all this reality that the biggest challenges we face are messy, and they can't be solved in isolation. So just remember, guys, if you ever find yourself in a boat and there's a hole in it and the hole's not fixed, it really doesn't matter which side of the boat the hole is in. Because the boat sinks, you're going to sink. And as a community, we are all in the same boat. Thank you.